It's what we feel like, though, when we're talking about shadow. That there's something dark and malevolent. Can you play that chord for me again, Michael? This show is so 80s that it just kills me sometimes, right? We hear that, though, in our head, right? That doom, that organ music when we start talking about the parts of ourselves that make us a little uncomfortable. I found this image, which I loved. There's Christine with the phantom disappearing into the depths. And that's what happens when we actually are willing to explore the shadow. We are stepping into the depths of who we are, the foundation of our understanding of who we are in the world. And that can be a little scary to actually engage with that. So if you remember the last time I was here speaking about peace in the midst, I brought this image in and I talked about how our intentionality and our spirituality is that we are, through our spiritual practice, through our understanding of principle, we are building this lighthouse that is us, that we are this beacon of light, we are the thing itself. And the more we practice and the more attention we pay, the stronger and more powerful that lighthouse becomes. Look at that dude just hanging out there on the railing as the storm surges all around him. So when we're talking about the shadow, what we're saying is, I'm willing to take a look at the very, 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 very first stones that were laid in that foundation of that lighthouse. I am willing to take a look at what's at that very root of the root. Some of this you have no memory of whatsoever. You made decisions when you were 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and even at 30 that you don't remember about who you were going to be and how you were going to show up in the world in order for you to get the things that you wanted from the world. So depending on whatever your familial environment was, whatever your culture was that you grew up in, there are certain qualities and attributes that were considered to be good, and there were certain qualities and attributes that were considered to be bad. And they vary wildly based on culture, based on a bunch of different things. But within your understanding of the world, your small understanding of the world, you made these decisions about who you were going to be and who you weren't going to be. That is what the shadow is. The part of you that you decided you weren't going to be. I am not that. I am not those things. I am not mean and nasty and selfish and greedy and dangerous and angry. I am not those things. I am not a bully. All these things that we decide are quote-unquote bad. And we say we're not going to be them. So it's the Jewish holidays have been going on. Yesterday was Yom Kippur, and Rosh Hashanah was the week before, so L'Shana Tova, may it be a sweet year for all of us as we celebrate the Jewish New Year. And that time between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is considered to be the holiest 10 days of the Jewish calendar. Those 10 days between the beginning of the new year and when Yom Kippur ends. And Yom Kippur is often called the Day of Atonement. And in those 10 days, the invitation is for you to look over the past year, to look over what you did, to try to see patterns of behavior, to try to see the places where you thrived and you were awesome, but also to reconcile yourself with the places within yourself where maybe you weren't quite the person you wanted to be. And to actually Be present to that. Atonement. Now, oftentimes that word gets linked up with sin, and it gets very complicated, so we're going to make it very unified. At one-ment. That is what we are talking about when we're talking about atonement. We're talking about being at one with yourself. We're talking about all of you, not just some of you, not just the parts that you actually like about yourself, but also the parts that make you uncomfortable. And there's a process within those 10 days. Now, if you remember, I talked about the silent meditation retreat I went on in my last talk, and I talked about it being 10 days. 10 days when you're really anchored and really doing the work, you come out of it a completely different person. And that's the whole point of those 10 days, is that you start the new year clear and clean and cleansed, so that you're not carrying stuff with you over and over and over again. Can anyone relate to that feeling? So, in the spirit of this time, this is the shadow, and this is scary, right? When we look at that and we kind of go, ooh, it got dark. There's a really big shadow there. The first step in this process is that we have to remember that you are light and you are whole. That oneness, the at oneness, that you are the thing itself. You are the light. It's not outside of you. You are the thing itself. That is the truth of who you are. That is the first step in embracing our shadow, because from that space, we're creating a sacred container. We're creating the space where real transformation can then happen and unfold. I love this quote. The brightest flame casts the darkest shadow. And this is very true for when you come into this teaching. Oftentimes you glow with the light of understanding of your divine nature. You come alive with it. And at the same time, lots of other stuff also gets very big and very present that had been perhaps quieter and calmer before. It's not that it wasn't there. It's just that you're accessing who you truly are. And in doing so, there's this shadow amplification. But that's because those parts of yourselves want to be whole. I really want to say that again. The parts of yourselves that feel outside of the truth of who you are, the parts of yourself that you have shoved off into the corner and said, bad, bad little girl, those parts of yourself desperately, desperately want to be light and whole. So the only resistance to embracing our shadow is us. And it's a big resistance. The second step in this process is you actually have to admit you have one. And let me be really clear, in this teaching, in New Thought teaching, where we focus on the good and we focus on our blessings and we focus on grace and we focus on light, guess what our shadow is? That we don't even think we have one. That is our shadow. Because the shadow is the thing about yourself that you don't want to be. And we want to be light and love and joy and peace and all of that. We don't want to be anger and greed and selfishness. So that becomes, the shadow itself becomes our shadow. Can you feel that? It's very tricky, this whole thing about the shadow. Because the whole point of the shadow is that it doesn't want to be seen. Your ego, your understanding of who you are, your personality in this dualistic world that we are living in as a human experience has a vested interest in keeping things exactly the way they are. It doesn't want you looking into the shadow because that threatens your sense of identity. It threatens your idea of who you think you are. Your ego is like, no, I don't want to look over there because I'm not that. It's all part. Can you see how it just feeds on itself? So your ego is keeping you from admitting that you even have a shadow or being willing to look at your shadow. And the fact that you're not looking at it means that it's actually in control. Really take that in for a second. Because the shadow is still operating. Just because you're not paying attention to it doesn't mean it's not doing its thing. It is actually still showing up in your activities, in your actions, in the way you experience the world. You are purposefully choosing to put blinders on. But that doesn't mean that it's not affecting you on a day-to-day basis. Our greatest qualities are tethered to the fear that we have of our flaws. The thing that we think is the thing that makes us the most horrible person in the world, that's actually our greatest gift. There is something in there for us to show up as. But when we allow the shadow to not be addressed, when we don't pay attention to it, it's like you know when you see kids on leashes? It's like the first image that came up though, right? The kid wants to go, wants to do, wants to run, and the leash is like, That's what your shadow is doing to you. It is stopping you from being able to fully express who and what you truly are. So step 3 is that we do need to consciously look for our shadow. I love that image. Isn't that a great image? We have to be willing to consciously choose to look for it. But how do you look for something you really can't see? How do you look for the thing? I mean, think about a shadow. It's like wherever I turn, my shadow is turning with me. So there are a number of ways that we can consciously look for it. Ways that we can see our shadow. We cannot see it directly. We cannot look at it directly. We have to look at it indirectly. And the number one way that we can see our shadow is through our projections. There's other ways too. Our dreams. Anyone in here have dreams that speak to you? That's a big way that our shadow speaks to us in ways that we can understand. But projection is the number one thing that is impacting in every moment the way you experience the world, the way you experience your life. And if you look at the image of the projection, you see that it starts off really small, and as it goes out into the world, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So when we project, what's happening is, because those things about ourselves make us so uncomfortable, I'm not that, I don't want to be that, I don't want to be a racist, I don't want to be a bully, I don't want to be whatever those things are. I don't want to be that. Because we don't want to be those things, we cannot look at them within ourselves. But they are calling out to be seen, and they are calling out to be healed. So they go outward onto the world. And they show up everywhere you look. When we are projecting, we are taking the thing that makes us the most uncomfortable about ourselves, and we are putting it out there on the world. And guess what? Do we see it out there in the world? All over the place. We see it everywhere. When we don't take responsibility for what is ours, we're just sort of spewing it out there on the world, and we're seeing it everywhere we look, and it's always out there. It's always somebody else. It's never ours. We see things not as they are, but as we are. Really breathe that in. We see things not as they are, but as we are. So if we're not willing to do the work and look at ourselves, really look at ourselves, look at those uncomfortable places within ourselves, make peace with ourselves, embrace those parts of ourselves, then we're just going to continue to see it out there everywhere. So you know that person who just irritates you? Everything they do drives you crazy? That's your shadow. That is your shadow. You know how you get judgmental and critical? Guess what? That's your shadow. That's yours. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't people out there in the world doing things that are rather interesting. It doesn't mean that. And the way you can tell whether, oh, and here's the kicker from Carl Jung, which I love. Everything that irritates us in others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That's the good news. Right? You have opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. People are bugging you. The world is bugging you. Things are irritating you. You are getting frustrated and annoyed. Guess what? It's an opportunity to come home. It's an opportunity to come home to yourself. And all too often, what we end up doing is just justifying our irritation. We justify the fact that we are right to be irritated. We don't actually do the work and call that projection back in and really own it and really heal it. So the way you can tell whether you are acting from shadow versus just really looking at somebody and being like, that's an interesting life choice, is the difference between whether you are reacting to something or you are responding to something. And I have spoken about this before, but this is really the linchpin. If you are reacting, if you are defensive, if you are irritated, if you are angry, if you get that flush, you get that thing, you know, that adrenaline rush, that is shadow. You are reacting. You are hooked. It's that part of you that got hooked. Debbie Ford in the book talks about the fact that she likes to use electrical outlets as the imagery. So imagine that you are just covered with electrical outlets, sockets. You are just a big walk-in socket, and somebody plugs into you. That's shadow. And what our goal is to look at those sockets and be like, well, do I really even need this anymore? What is this? So that there's no place for anything to actually hook in. Now, if you're responding to somebody, you know that too. You know how there are people where a friend will come up to you and go, don't they drive you crazy? And you're like, no, not really. I can kind of see why it might drive you crazy, but I don't have a problem with it. That's you responding. There's no hook there. Your shadow isn't involved in whatever that is. But if you join the, yeah, isn't that so, she's so annoying. Oh my God, she drives me crazy. Guess what? That's your shadow. Think about how often that happens throughout your day. Really. Think about how throughout your day, in traffic, on Muni, in the midst of whatever you're doing, interacting with your family, how that thing kind of kicks up. That is an opportunity. That's what that is. If we can embrace the shadow, then we're not afraid of it anymore. And we are willing to say, oh, look at me, I'm leaping out of my skin here. There's good stuff here for me to explore. There's something within me that wants to be more whole. There's something in me that wants to be healed. And the final step is, as you come to those realizations, you have got to meet yourself with compassion and love. This goes back to step number 1. Know that you are the light. Know that you are whole. Know that as these things are arising within you that make you uncomfortable, the shame, the blame, the guilt, all of it, as you pay attention to them, that you need to meet that from that place of wholeness and from that place of love. That is probably the most foundational and fundamental difference about working with shadow from a psychotherapy, psychological perspective versus working with shadow from a spiritual perspective. In the spiritual perspective, we start from a place of wholeness. We start from a place of perfection, imperfectly perfect. We start from that space and we make that container so large and so strong and so powerful that when we call up the things that make us feel less than, as we call up the things that make us feel less than, we meet them in truth. But we don't meet them like a hammer. We don't meet them like bad you. We don't practice spiritual malpractice on ourselves, taking our affirmations and bludgeoning ourselves to death. What we do is we take it in grace and compassion and love. This is a process of integration, folks, and this is not an intellectual pursuit. Can you feel that? We are talking about deep, deep, deep stuff. And we're talking about it from an emotional, embodied awareness. It doesn't make logical sense. It's not always rational. But the process is a complete open invitation to be that container of love for yourself. There is no practice more powerful than this. I have people often ask me, like, oh, you're so full of life, you're so joyous, you've always been that way. And it's like, I've always had the potential within me to be this. But it wasn't until I stepped into the shadow work that I was able to truly release my joy and my freedom and my Tigger, right? It took my stepping into this space, being Christine and being willing to follow the phantom into the very depths of my being and meeting myself with truth, meeting myself with principle. So the steps. First, you have to anchor the light and the wholeness that you are. You cannot do this work if you are operating from the place that you are broken, because all you will do is break yourself even more. Can you feel the truth of that? You have to anchor wholeness and light and love. You have to anchor that for yourself and for others. That's why doing this in a class situation is so powerful. Because it allows you to see and hold space and be held in this space by others. Embrace that you have a shadow. I mean, really embrace it. Embrace that there is a part of you that you have relegated to the nether depths of your being. Because it makes you uncomfortable, because you don't like it, because when you were a kid, you were told that being creative was bad. You needed to be my father. Bless my father, we're blessing my father right now, who thought that my being an accountant was the perfect job for me. It was because all he was thinking about was something else. Security, stability. He wasn't thinking about who I was. So I grew up thinking, I need to be an accountant. I need to be this thing. It wasn't okay to be those other things until I rebelled. And then I found myself. But that was a shadow piece that I had to let go of, that somehow being a creative artist was less stable than being an accountant. Why? Why does that have to be? That's not truth. Can you feel that's not truth? That's just a belief out there. That's not real. But if I believe it, then guess what? It's showing up as my life. And oh man, did I struggle with financial stability as an artist. Because I believed that. And then you got to consciously look for your shadow. And where do you look? You look for your reactivity. You look for your criticism. You look for your judgment. You look for the blame. It's all their fault. If only they had. And then the biggest one. You have to meet yourself with love and compassion. Because that's where the healing happens. As we bring that part of ourself that feels outside. This is where you get to be your own answered prayer. You, as the beacon of light, as the being that knows truth, that knows that you actually are the light itself, gets to hold that part of you that feels separate and outside of that light. And in that process, transformation happens. Change happens in a heartbeat. In a heartbeat. Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. This is heart work. This is real listening work. That's the beauty of it. That's why I love it. You get to swim with your deepest self, who looks outside dreams. So he's talking about projection. When we project outside, we're looking outside for all the things that are wrong. And what we end up is living into an illusion. It's a dream. It's not real, because we are only seeing the world as we are. Who looks inside awakens. awakens into the very truth of who we are. And all those things that are calling you, all that love and light and joy and beauty and harmony and grace and abundance and overflow that you are calling into your life. When we meet the shadow, you get to find the parts of yourself that are actually going to help you do it, be it. You're hiding them away. Don't hide them away. Bring them into the light of day. I'm going to close with Rumi's quote because I love it. Both light and shadow are the dance of love. There is no good or bad. There is just what you have decided is so. You have arbitrarily placed parts of yourself into hell and elevated other parts of yourself into heaven. What if you just were? What if you just opened yourself to the isness that is? What if you just allowed yourself to truly be whole, fully whole, not cutting yourself off because of some decision you made when you were 3, or some decision your parents made, or some decision this country's culture made? Don't abdicate your own responsibility in your capacity to truly heal yourself. You are the architect of your own experience. And if you are willing to walk straight through and dance as love with both the light and the shadow within you, then wholeness just blossoms as your very life. So let's take this into meditation.